The world outside his window was washing itself clean. Alex lay in his bed, listening. It had been one of those days where everything felt a little too loud, a little too bright. The buzz of his phone, the glare of the computer screen, the endless list of small things he was supposed to remember but kept forgetting. His mind had been a busy, cluttered room all day long, but now finally it was quiet. The only sound was the rain. It wasn't a scary, angry rain that hammered against the glass, and it wasn't a sad, lonely drizzle. This was a steady, gentle, patient rain. The kind of rain that had all the time in the world. Tap. Tap! Tap, tap! Tap. He pulled the soft, heavy blanket up to his chin, feeling the weight of it settle over him. It was a comforting weight, like a gentle hand on his shoulder, telling him it was okay to stop, to just be. He wiggled his toes against the cool sheets at the bottom of the bed and let out a long, slow breath, one he felt like he'd been holding all day. He closed his eyes, but he didn't try to force sleep. He just listened. Each raindrop was a tiny drummer in a vast, peaceful band. Some hit the window pane directly, making a clear, sharp ping. Others landed on the leaves of the big oak tree outside his window, creating a softer, rustling shush sound. The water from the gutter poured down in a constant, low whoosh. Together they made a kind of music, a natural lullaby that had been playing since the world began. His thoughts, which had been racing in circles just an hour before, began to slow down. They were like cars on a highway, one by one, taking an exit and driving away into the quiet night. The worry about the email he forgot to send, it took an exit. The memory of that awkward thing he said in the meeting, it drove off too. The mental list of what he needed to do tomorrow, it faded into the distance, its noise replaced by the simple rhythmic sound of the water. He remembered being a little boy, maybe 7 or 8, on a rainy night just like this one. His mother would tuck him in, and the sound of the storm would make him feel so safe, so protected inside his little room. The rain built a cozy wall between him and the outside world. Nothing could get in. He was in a soft, warm cave, and the world could wait until morning. That's exactly how he felt now. An adult with adult problems, but in this moment, he was just that boy again, safe in his cave. He focused on the feeling of the bed beneath him, the soft pillow cradling his head, the gentle rise and fall of his own chest as he breathed, in and out, in and out. His breathing started to match the rhythm of the rain, a slow, steady in-breath and a long, slow out-breath that carried away the last bits of tension. A smile touched his lips. It was a small, quiet smile, but it was real. This was a gift. This quiet moment. This peace. He wasn't fighting for it. He was just letting it happen, letting the rain do its work. His body began to feel heavier, but in a good way. It was as if he was sinking not through the bed, but into a deeper state of rest. His fingers, which had been typing and scrolling all day, lay still and open. His jaw, which he hadn't even realized was clenched, relaxed. His shoulders dropped away from his ears. The line between the sound of the rain outside and the feeling inside his own body began to blur. The soft shush of the rain on the leaves was the sound of his own quiet mind. The steady tap on the window was the gentle beat of his own heart. He wasn't just listening to the rain anymore. He was a part of it. He was dissolving into the calm, wet, peaceful night. He knew without any doubt that sleep was coming, not as a struggle, but as a natural, gentle tide, washing in to cover the sharp, dry stones of the day. He didn't need to chase it. He just needed to keep breathing and keep listening. And as he listened, the sound of the rain began to change just a little. It started to sound less like water on glass and more like footsteps on a soft, wet path. But that was a thought for later. For now, there was only the comfort, the darkness behind his eyelids, and the beautiful, endless, soothing rain. The sound of the rain was no longer just outside his window. It was all around him now, a soft, constant whisper that had wrapped itself around the world. Alex kept his eyes closed, but he wasn't in his bed anymore. Or rather, he was, but he was also somewhere else. It was a feeling he remembered from childhood, that strange, wonderful moment just before dreams truly begin, where you are both awake and asleep, both here and there. The soft mattress beneath him began to feel different. It was no longer smooth cotton, but something more textured, more earthy. He felt a gentle, springy firmness under his back. He slowly wiggled his fingers, and instead of brushing against his soft blanket, they dipped into a cool, damp carpet of something. He opened his eyes. He was lying in a forest. The sky above was a deep twilight gray, but it wasn't dark. A soft, silvery light filtered down through a dense ceiling of pine branches. The air was fresh and clean, filled with a smell that made him feel incredibly calm. The rich, deep scent of wet earth, the sharp, clean fragrance of pine needles, and the sweet decay of old leaves. It was the smell of a place untouched by time. He sat up slowly, expecting to feel afraid or confused, but those feelings were nowhere to be found. A deep, quiet peace filled him instead. It felt as natural as breathing. He looked down at where he had been lying. He was on a thick bed of golden brown pine needles, soft and dry despite the dampness in the air. It was as if the forest itself had made a bed for him. The rain here was different from the rain on his window. Didn't tap or ping. Up in the high branches of the giant pine trees, it gathered into fat drops that would occasionally let go and fall. They would plink on a broad leaf or pat on a mushroom cap, or land with a soft thud on the forest floor. It was a lazy, scattered rhythm, 1,000 times more soothing than any music. He got to his feet, his movements slow and unhurried. He was still wearing his soft pajamas, and his bare feet sank into the cool, velvety moss that grew between the tree roots. It felt wonderful. A path lay before him, not a path made by people, but one made by time and animals. It was a narrow ribbon of darker earth, winding away between the enormous trunks of the trees. These trees were ancient. Their bark was rough and deeply furrowed like the wise old faces of grandfathers. They stood tall and silent, their highest branches whispering secrets to each other in a language only they could understand. The sound was a low, gentle hum, a constant background note to the music of the dripping rain. He felt no urge to question this. His busy mind, which usually demanded answers and maps and plans, was perfectly still. He simply knew, in the way you know the sun will rise, that he was meant to walk this path. So he began. Each step was quiet. The pine needle carpet absorbed all sound. He walked without a destination, simply feeling the world around him. He reached out and let his fingertips brush against the trunk of a passing pine. The bark was rough and damp, and a small trickle of cold water ran down a groove, wetting his fingers. It felt real. It felt more real in a way than the plastic of his computer keyboard had felt just a few hours ago. He noticed the small, beautiful details of the forest. A bright green fern, unfurling like a delicate scroll. A cluster of tiny orange mushrooms growing in a perfect circle on a rotting log. A single perfect dewdrop hanging from the tip of a pine needle, catching the silvery light and holding it like a tiny diamond. He walked for what felt like both a minute and an hour, the concept of time melting away like sugar in tea. The path began to slope gently downwards, and the sound of the rain was joined by another sound, a soft, gurgling whisper. It was the sound of water flowing over stones. Soon, he saw it. The path led to a small, clear stream that cut across the forest. The water was dark from the rain, but he could see smooth, round stones on the bottom, looking like sleeping animals in the dim light. The stream wasn't wide, maybe only 3 or 4 steps across, and there, spanning the water, was a bridge. It wasn't a grand bridge. It was simple and old, made of a single wide log flattened on top for walking. Moss grew on its sides in thick, emerald green patches. It looked ancient and completely belonging to this place, but Alex stopped walking, because he was not alone. On the other side of the stream, seated on a large, moss-covered stone right next to the bridge, was a wolf. Its fur was the color of wood smoke and shadows, thick and gray. It was large, much larger than Alex had imagined a wolf could be. It wasn't moving. It wasn't growling. It was simply sitting, perfectly still, its head held high and its eyes fixed directly on Alex. A flicker of his old, everyday self sparked inside him, a jolt of pure, animal fear. His breath caught in his throat, but as quickly as it came, the fear faded, washed away by the deep, pervasive peace of the forest. He looked into the wolf's eyes, and he did not see anger or hunger. He saw awareness. The wolf's eyes were a pale, silvery yellow like old moonlight, and they held a deep, ancient intelligence. They were calm and knowing, as if this wolf had seen countless seasons turn and had watched many travelers approach this very bridge. This was not a monster. This was a guardian. Alex stood still, not out of fear now, but out of respect. He didn't know what to do. Should he turn back? Should he try to cross? He waited, listening to the gurgle of the stream and the plink of the raindrops. The wolf continued to watch him. Then, very slowly, It lowered its massive head in a single, deliberate nod. It was not a threat. It was an acknowledgement. It was as if the wolf was saying, "I see you. I know why you are here." Then without a sound, the great creature rose from the stone. It turned, its gray form blending seamlessly with the shadows between the trees, and in 2 silent strides it was gone. Vanished into the forest as if it had never been there at all. The path ahead was clear. The invitation was given. Alex took a deep, slow breath, the clean, pine-scented air filling his lungs. He stepped onto the mossy bridge. The wood felt solid and sure beneath his bare feet. He crossed over the whispering stream, and as he stepped onto the far bank, he felt a subtle shift in the air, a gentle pull forward, deeper into the waiting, mystical quiet of the woods. The other side of the stream felt different. It wasn't something he could see, but something he could feel. A subtle change in the air itself. It was a little quieter, the sounds of the forest seeming to hold their breath. The light from the gray sky above was softer too, as if it was filtering through a finer, more delicate sieve. The giant pine trees still stood tall, but the spaces between them seemed wider, more open. Alex walked on, his bare feet making no sound on the path. The encounter with the wolf had left a deep impression on him. There had been no fear in the end, only a feeling of being assessed and found worthy. It was a strange feeling, but a good one. It made this journey feel important, not just a random dream. The path began to gently slope upwards now, winding around the bases of the ancient trees. He noticed the forest floor was changing. The deep carpet of brown pine needles was giving way to patches of the most incredible moss he had ever seen. It wasn't just green. It was a whole world of green. There were patches as bright as new limes and others as deep and dark as emeralds. Some grew in thick, soft cushions that looked like tiny pillows, and other types grew in delicate star-shaped patterns. He couldn't resist. He stopped and knelt down, gently pressing his fingers into a particularly plump cushion of moss. It was unbelievably soft and cool, and it released a clean, earthy scent that made him smile. As he stood up, a flicker of light caught his eye. It was just a quick, soft pulse from between the roots of a giant fallen tree. He blinked, thinking it was just a trick of the fading light. But then it came again. A gentle, greenish glow that appeared and then faded like a slow, silent heartbeat. Curious, he stepped off the path and carefully made his way towards the old log. As he got closer, his eyes widened. It wasn't a trick of the light at all. Growing all along the damp, rotting wood was a cluster of mushrooms that were glowing with their own inner light. They were small, with smooth, pale stems and caps that shone with a soft, ethereal blue-green color. They pulsed gently, rhythmically, as if they were breathing. He had heard of such things, foxfire or glowing mushrooms, but he had never imagined they could be so beautiful. He crouched down, watching them. Their light wasn't bright enough to read by, but it was enough to push back the shadows, creating a small, magical circle of illumination. In that gentle glow, he saw tiny dewdrops on the moss nearby, each one holding the mushroom's light like a perfect miniature crystal ball. He continued on, and now that he knew what to look for, he saw them everywhere. The glowing mushrooms were not just on that one log. They dotted the forest floor, clustered at the base of trees, and lined the edges of the path like tiny living streetlights guiding his way. Some were a soft blue, others a ghostly green, and some even had a warm golden hue. The whole forest floor was a silent, breathing constellation. The sight was so mesmerizing that he almost didn't notice the forest was opening up ahead of him. The path led out of the thick trees and into a large circular clearing. And here the real magic began. The entire clearing was alive with light. It was covered, every inch, in a carpet of the glowing mushrooms. There were hundreds, thousands of them, all pulsing together in a slow, peaceful, silent rhythm. It was like looking at a city from a great height at night, but a city that was completely silent and utterly peaceful. The light they cast washed over the clearing in soft waves, turning the mist that hung in the air into a shimmering, luminous fog. In the very center of the clearing stood a single ancient oak tree, its branches spreading wide and sheltering the glowing ground below. The trunk was enormous, and tangled in its great roots were more mushrooms, these ones glowing with a warm golden light that made the old tree look like a wise, kind king sitting on a throne of stars. Alex stood at the edge of the clearing, simply taking it in. He felt his breath catch in his throat, not from fear, but from pure, simple wonder. This was more beautiful than any special effect in any movie he had ever seen. This was real. It felt real. The cool air on his skin was real. The soft, damp earth under his feet was real, and this incredible, silent light show was happening right in front of him. He walked slowly into the center of the clearing, the glowing mushrooms dimming slightly under his feet as he stepped, then brightening again once he passed, as if they were acknowledging his presence. He reached the great oak tree and placed a hand on its rough, damp bark. It felt solid and strong, an anchor in this sea of soft light. He looked up. Through the branches of the oak tree, he could see the gray, rainy sky. But the mushrooms made their own sky below, their soft glow reflecting off the underside of the leaves. He felt a profound sense of peace settle over him, deeper than any he had felt before. The quiet was absolute, broken only by the occasional plink of a raindrop falling from a leaf into the glowing carpet below. This place was a secret, a gift. He knew without being told that this was a place of rest, a place where the forest itself came to dream. He sat down, leaning his back against the great oak tree, and simply watched the gentle pulse of the light. He didn't need to be anywhere else. He didn't need to do anything else. Just being here in this moment was more than enough. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to feel it all more deeply. The cool bark against his back, the soft rhythm of the glowing light against his eyelids, the clean, damp air filling his lungs. For the first time in a very, very long time, his mind was completely quiet. There were no thoughts, no lists, no worries. There was only this perfect, peaceful glowing now. And in that perfect silence, he felt the path calling him again. Not with a sound, but with a gentle pull in his heart. There was more to see. He opened his eyes, gave one last look at the beautiful, glowing clearing, and then stood up. The mushrooms seemed to brighten for a moment, a silent farewell as he walked back to the path on the other side, ready to see where it would lead him next. Leaving the glowing clearing felt like saying goodbye to a dear friend. Alex walked slowly, the image of the soft, pulsing light still painted on the back of his eyelids every time he blinked. The path here was different again. It was wider, and the pine trees began to thin out, replaced by slender, white-barked birch trees whose leaves trembled and whispered with every gentle breath of wind. The rain was still a constant, gentle presence, but it was lighter now, more of a mist that hung in the air, cooling his face and dampening his pajamas. He walked for a while, the memory of the mushrooms warming him from the inside. The peace he had found under the old oak tree stayed with him, a quiet companion on his journey. He felt lighter, as if he had left a heavy bag he didn't even know he was carrying back in that glowing clearing. Soon the whisper of the birch leaves was joined by a new sound. It was a low, deep, groaning sound mixed with a soft, rhythmic creak. 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 It wasn't a scary sound. It was old. It was the sound of weight shifting, of wood settling, like an old house talking to itself in the night. He followed the sound, his curiosity pulling him forward. The mist grew a little thicker, and through it, he began to see a dark, tall shape looming ahead. As he got closer, the shape became clearer, and his steps slowed almost to a stop. His eyes widened, not in fear, but in pure, childlike disbelief. It was the hut. It stood in the center of a large, muddy clearing, surrounded by a wobbly fence made of what looked like old, pale bones. But it wasn't the fence that held his attention. It was the hut itself. It was just as the old stories described, a small, crooked wooden cabin with a single small window that glowed with a warm, orange light. It had a rickety porch and a chimney from which a thin wisp of gray smoke curled up into the wet sky, and it was standing on two enormous, scaly yellow chicken legs. The stories were true. Every last impossible bit of them. The hut was moving. It wasn't walking anywhere, but it was swaying. The two giant legs would bend slowly at the knee, one and then the other, causing the entire cabin to tilt and shift from side to side. With each movement, it let out that deep, groaning creak he had heard. It was a slow, lumbering, almost sleepy dance. The legs sank a little into the soft, wet earth with each step, making a soft, squelching sound. Alex stood at the edge of the trees, just watching. He should have been terrified. This was the home of Baba Yaga, the fearsome witch of legend who captured children and flew in a mortar and pestle. But the same deep calm that had held him since he entered the forest was still there. The hut's movement was so slow, so rhythmic, it was hypnotic. It looked less like a monster and more like a strange, tired old creature, restless in its sleep. He watched as one of the giant bird-like feet lifted, the long, scaly toes curling up out of the mud, then planted itself a few inches to the side. Then the other did the same. Creak, squelch, creak, squelch. It was a dance with no beginning and no end, a dance it had been dancing for 1,000 years. He noticed something else too. The hut wasn't just standing in a random spot, it was slowly turning in a very wide, slow circle, its movements tracing a deep, muddy path around a single, large black stone in the center of the clearing. It was pacing. It was guarding. What should he do? The stories said you had to know the right words to make the hut stop its dancing and turn its door toward you. He searched his memory, but his mind, so quiet and peaceful, offered nothing. He had no magic spells. He was just a man in his pajamas standing in the rain. So he did the only thing that felt right. He took a deep breath, stepped out from the cover of the birch trees, and walked slowly toward the wobbling bone fence. He stopped a respectful distance away, his bare feet cold in the wet grass, and he waited. He didn't shout. He didn't wave his arms. He simply stood there, watching the hut's slow, creaking dance, showing that he was not a threat. He was just a visitor. For a long time, nothing changed. The hut continued its slow, turning sway. The rain misted his hair and face. He began to wonder if this was the end of his journey. Maybe he was just meant to see it and then go back. But then, something shifted. The hut, which had been turning away from him, completed one of its slow, creaking steps and then paused. The giant legs stiffened. The deep groaning stopped. The only sound was the soft patter of the rain on the leaves. Slowly, very slowly, the legs began to bend again. But this time, they were turning. The huge, clawed feet lifted and repositioned themselves, pivoting the entire cabin. Alex held his breath. The hut was turning to face him. It took a full minute for the movement to complete. With one final, deep creak, the hut settled, its front porch now directly facing him. The door, a rough piece of wood with iron hinges, was just a dozen steps away. The silence felt heavy and expectant. The hut was still. It was waiting. Alex looked at the door. He looked at the single, glowing window. The warm, orange light from inside looked incredibly inviting after the cool, gray damp of the forest. It promised warmth and shelter. He walked forward. His heart was beating a little faster, but it wasn't with fear. It was with anticipation. He reached the wobbly bone fence and found a small gate. He pushed it open, the old bones rattling softly together. He walked across the short, muddy space to the bottom of the porch steps. The two giant chicken legs were planted firmly on either side. He could see the individual, dirt-caked scales, larger than his hand. They smelled of wet earth and old, deep forests. He put a foot on the first wooden step. It didn't break. It felt solid. He climbed the 3 steps to the porch. The wooden planks felt rough and strong under his bare feet. He stood now directly in front of the door. Up close, he could see the grain of the wood, the hand-forged look of the iron hinges. He could feel a faint warmth coming from the other side of the door, and that smell. It was a mix of wood smoke, baking bread, and drying flowers. It was the smell of a home. He didn't knock. He simply stood there, ready for whatever came next. The forest behind him was silent. The hut beneath him was still. The entire world seemed to be holding its breath with him. And then, with a soft, slow scrape of wood on wood, the door began to open inward all by itself, spilling a golden rectangle of firelight onto the porch where he stood. The door swung inward without a sound, revealing the space within. A wave of dry, wonderful warmth flowed out and wrapped around Alex, chasing away the chill that had settled on his skin from the misty forest air. The light from inside was a soft golden orange flickering gently, and it made the wet, dark world outside feel a million miles away. He hesitated for only a second on the threshold, a lifetime of habit telling him not to walk into a stranger's house. But this was different. The open door was a clear invitation. So he took a small step, and then another, and crossed over into Baba Yaga's hut. The first thing that hit him was the smell. It was a rich, complicated, and deeply comforting mixture of 100 different things. There was the strong, clean scent of pine resin, as if the walls themselves were made of the forest. Underneath, that was the sweet, dusty smell of drying flowers and herbs. He saw bundles of lavender, chamomile, and things he didn't recognize hanging by their stems from the low ceiling beams. And weaving through it all was the most homey smell of all, the warm, yeasty scent of baking bread. He stood just inside the door and let his eyes adjust. The room was circular, built around the huge black clay stove he had seen from the outside. A small, gentle fire crackled behind its iron door, and the heat it gave off was the source of the wonderful warmth. The floor was made of packed earth, smooth and cool under his bare feet. The hut was cluttered, but it wasn't messy. It was the clutter of a long, full life. Every surface was covered with something interesting. Wooden shelves were crammed with clay pots of all sizes, some sealed with wax, others open, revealing dried leaves, berries, and mushrooms inside. There were smooth gray river stones arranged, in a spiral on a small table, and feathers of all colors, jet black, speckled brown, bright blue, tucked into the spaces between the logs of the wall. A mortar and pestle, both made of dark, heavy stone, sat on a bench, a fine greenish powder dusting their inside. It was a place of making, of creating, of secrets. But it didn't feel dangerous. It felt knowledgeable. And then, he saw her. In a large, high-backed rocking chair near the stove sat Baba Yaga. She was rocking back and forth ever so slowly, the chair making a soft, rhythmic creak. Creak. That was the only sound besides the crackling fire. She was old. Older than anyone he had ever seen or could even imagine. Her skin was like wrinkled brown leather, pulled tight over the sharp bones of her face. Her nose was long and hooked, and her fingers, which rested in her lap, were long and thin with knobby knuckles. Her hair was a wild, flowing cloud of the purest silver, so long that it pooled on the floor around the base of her chair. He waited for the fear to come. The stories described a terrifying, bony-legged witch who threatened to eat people. But as he looked at her, he felt none of that. She wasn't looking at him with anger or hunger. Her head was tilted back against the chair and her eyes were closed. She seemed to be resting, her chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm that matched the rocking of her chair. He didn't know what to do. Should he speak? Should he cough to announce his presence? He felt like an intruder on a very private, very peaceful moment, so he just stood there quietly waiting. He looked around the room again, noticing more details. A large black cast-iron kettle hung over the fire, steam beginning to puff quietly from its spout. A thick, colorful woven rug lay in front of the stove. A simple wooden loom sat in one corner, a half-finished cloth hanging from it. The threads a mix of earthy browns and deep forest greens. He was so busy looking that he didn't notice the rocking had stopped. When he looked back, her eyes were open. They were the palest, clearest blue he had ever seen, like the winter sky on a cold, sunny morning. And they were fixed directly on him. There was no surprise in them, no anger. They were deep, ancient, and incredibly knowing. It felt like she was looking right through his eyes and into the quiet, tired places deep inside his soul. She saw the long days, the busy thoughts, the yearning for rest. She saw all of it, and she simply accepted it. He didn't feel judged. He felt seen, truly seen for the first time in a very long time. She didn't smile. Her ancient face was too lined for simple expressions, but the sharpness in her eyes softened just a little. She slowly raised one of her long, bony hands and pointed a single, graceful finger toward a small, three-legged stool that sat near her rocking chair. It was an invitation, a command, a kindness. Wordlessly, Alex walked forward. The packed earth floor was smooth and cool. He reached the stool and sat down, the simple seat putting him at a level just a little lower than her. The warmth from the stove washed over him, seeping into his bones. He folded his hands in his lap and waited. Baba Yaga watched him for another long moment. Then her eyes shifted to the kettle puffing steam by the fire. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace that defied her great age. She reached for a simple clay cup that sat on a shelf beside her chair. Leaning forward, she used a thick cloth to lift the kettle from its hook and poured the hot water into the cup. The room filled with a new, wonderful smell, a mix of chamomile, mint, and something else, something wild and earthy that he didn't know. She held the steaming cup out to him. It was not a test. It was not a trick. It was an offering, a gesture of hospitality from the keeper of this strange and peaceful place. Alex reached out, his fingers gently brushing against her gnarled ones as he took the warm clay cup. He brought it close to his face, breathing in the soothing herbal steam. It smelled like peace. It smelled like a long, deep, and dreamless sleep. He looked over the rim of the cup at the ancient woman. She had settled back into her rocking chair, her pale blue eyes still on him, calm and accepting. She gave a single, slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was time to drink. The clay cup was warm in his hands, a comforting, earthy warmth. Alex looked down into the tea. It was a pale golden color, like honey, and little flecks of herbs swirled slowly in the water. The steam rose and curled under his nose, carrying that incredible smell: chamomile for calm, mint for clarity, and that other wild, unknown herb that smelled of deep forests and secret roots. He looked up at Baba Yaga. Her pale, winter sky eyes were watching him, patient and still. There was no pressure in her gaze, only a quiet expectation. She had given him a gift, and now it was his to receive. He brought the cup to his lips and took a small, careful sip. The taste was not what he expected. It wasn't bitter or strange. It was warm. It was the taste of sunlight on a dry meadow. It was the taste of a soft summer rain. It was the taste of quiet. As the liquid flowed over his tongue and down his throat, a wave of deep, heavy warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't a hot, burning feeling. It was a slow, melting warmth, like butter melting on warm bread. He took another sip, a deeper one this time. He closed his eyes as he swallowed. The warmth from the tea began to spread out from his core, moving down his arms and into his fingertips. He felt the last little bits of tension in his shoulders, the tightness he carried from hunching over a computer, begin to loosen and dissolve. The gentle ache in his lower back, which was always there, softened and then faded away completely, as if the warmth was smoothing it out with a gentle hand. He felt the warmth travel down his legs, into his feet, which had been cool from walking on the forest floor. Now they felt toasty and heavy, perfectly relaxed. It was a wonderful, weighted feeling, as if he was sinking gently into the very ground held securely by the earth itself. He opened his eyes and took a third sip. This time the warmth traveled upwards, filling his head. The quiet hum of thoughts that usually lived in the back of his mind, the little voice that was always planning, remembering, or worrying, simply went silent. It didn't shout or struggle. It just gently closed its door and went to sleep. His mind felt clear, like a calm, still lake on a windless day, empty but in a peaceful, spacious way. He drank until the cup was empty. He held the warm, empty clay cup in his hands, feeling the last of the heat seep into his palms. He felt incredibly heavy, but in the most wonderful way. He was an anchor, settled deep into the ocean floor. Nothing could move him. Nothing could disturb him. Baba Yaga watched him, and for the first time he saw a change in her ancient face. The very corners of her eyes crinkled just the tiniest bit. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was a look of deep, quiet understanding. She knew the journey he had been on. She knew the weight he had been carrying, and she approved of his surrender to the peace. She reached out one of her long, bony hands and gently took the empty cup from his loose fingers. Her touch was dry and light, like a falling leaf. She placed the cup back on the shelf without a sound. Then she did something he didn't expect. She began to hum. It was a low, soft, wordless sound, so deep it seemed to come not from her, but from the hut itself, from the forest outside, from the very earth below. It was a single, steady note that held all other sounds within it. He could hear the crackle of the fire in her hum. He could hear the whisper of the rain on the roof. He could hear the creak of the hut's giant legs as they settled deeper into the mud outside. It was the lullaby of the world. The sound vibrated in the air around him and inside his own chest. It matched the slow, heavy rhythm of his own heartbeat. Thump, thump, He leaned back, his body feeling so relaxed he could barely sit up straight. His eyelids were like heavy curtains being drawn closed at the end of a long, perfect day. He didn't fight it. He let them close. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he could still see the gentle golden light from the fire. He could still feel the deep melting warmth of the tea in every part of his body. He could still hear the old woman's humming, a sound that was now woven into the very fabric of his being. He was safe. He was warm. He was deeply, profoundly cared for. The fearsome witch of legend was nothing more than a kind, ancient grandmother, singing the world and him to sleep. The humming continued, steady and eternal. It wrapped around him like a soft, invisible blanket. The line between his own body and the warm, smoky air of the hut began to blur. He was part of the hut. He was part of the hum. He was part of the gentle, rocking motion of the world. There was no more thought, no more journey. There was only this perfect, heavy, peaceful stillness. He was drifting away on a deep, dark, quiet river, and the humming was the current, carrying him gently away from all his worries, into the deepest and most restful sleep he had ever known. The deep, heavy warmth from the tea had done its work. Alex was not asleep, not yet, but he was nestled in the soft, gray space right on its border. The world had become a distant, gentle hum. The fire crackled, but the sound was muffled and soft, like listening to the ocean from inside a seashell. Baba Yaga's rocking chair still creaked, but now it was the slow, steady heartbeat of the hut itself. He felt himself drifting. It was not the drifting of a boat on rough water, but the slow, peaceful floating of a leaf on a perfectly still pond. There was no up or down, no forward or back. There was only this gentle, weightless suspension. Behind his closed eyelids, colors began to bloom. They were not bright or jarring, but soft and muted, like dyes spreading in water. He saw the deep forest green of the moss he had walked upon. He saw the gentle golden glow of the firelight. He saw the silvery blue of the mist between the trees. The colors swirled together, slow and lazy, painting pictures that melted away as soon as they formed. A feeling rose in his chest. A feeling so simple and pure it almost brought a tear to his eye. It was the feeling of being a very small child, tucked into bed after a long day of play. It was the feeling of knowing without a single doubt that you are safe, that you are loved, that the grown-ups are in charge of the world and all you have to do is rest. In this half-dream state, he became aware of the hut around him in a new way. He could feel the great, scaly chicken legs curled up beneath the floor, settled deep into the cool earth, finally at rest. He could feel the ancient wood of the walls, each log holding the memory of 100 winters and 1,000 rains. The hut was not just a building. It was a living, breathing creature, and it was holding him gently in its care. The hum continued, but now it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. It was in the air he breathed. It was in the warmth that radiated from the clay stove. It was in the very stillness of his own bones. It was a sound that had no beginning and no end. It was the sound of silence itself. He felt a gentle pressure on his forehead, cool and dry. It was there for only a moment, light as a moth's wing. It was a blessing, a final wish for peaceful dreams. He would never know if it was her hand, or a falling leaf from one of the herbs, or just a trick of the warm air, but the feeling of it lingered, a perfect, cool point on his skin. His breathing had become so slow, so shallow. Each inhale was a tiny sip of the fragrant, smoky air. Each exhale was the release of a worry he didn't even know he was still holding. With every breath out, he felt himself sink deeper into the incredible softness that was now all around him. It was softer than the finest pillow, softer than the thickest moss. It was the softness of pure peace. Memories, not as thoughts but as feelings, floated through him. The cool touch of the stream water, the silent knowing eyes of the gray wolf, the awe of the glowing mushroom clearing, the creaking gentle dance of the hut. Each one was a stepping stone that had led him here to this stool, in this warm hut held in this ancient silence. He was not Alex anymore, the person with a name and a job and a list of things to do. He was just a being, a quiet heart, a resting body. He was a part of the forest, and the forest was a part of him. There was no separation. The gentle pull of sleep was now a strong, quiet tide. It was not something he could fight, nor did he want to. It felt like the most natural, the most right thing in the world. To surrender to this feeling was to come home. The last thing he was aware of was the scent. The mix of pine and smoke and herbs wrapped around him like a final, loving embrace. It was the last anchor to the waking world. He took one last deep breath, filling his lungs with the smell of peace. And then he let it go. He released the breath, and with it, he released everything. His consciousness, like a sandcastle at the edge of the sea, was gently washed away by the waves of sleep. There was no struggle, no last thought, Just a smooth, seamless transition from being awake to being gone. The hut was silent now, save for the soft crackle of the fire and the slow, rhythmic creak of the rocking chair. The journey was over. The forest outside was dark and quiet, the rain now just a memory on the leaves. Inside, held in the warmth and the ancient magic, the man slept. Not just a normal sleep, but the deep, dreamless and healing sleep he had been searching for his entire life. He was finally and completely at rest. There was no blackness. There was no sense of time passing. For a long while, there was nothing at all. Just a deep, velvety silence that filled every part of him. It was the silence of a stone at the bottom of a lake, resting in the cool, still dark. It was the silence of a seed sleeping deep in the winter earth, full of potential, but utterly at rest. Then, very slowly, a feeling began to return. It wasn't a thought or a sound, but a gentle rocking motion, a soft rhythmic sway back and forth, back and forth. It was the same comforting motion he had felt from Baba Yaga's rocking chair, but now it was all around him. He was being cradled. He was no longer sitting on the little stool in the hut. He was lying down, curled on his side on something incredibly soft. He slowly opened his eyes, but he didn't need to see to know where he was. He was back in the main room of the hut, lying on the thick, colorful woven rug in front of the great clay stove. Someone had placed a soft woolen blanket over him. The fire was still crackling gently behind the iron door, painting the room in dancing orange shadows. Baba Yaga was still in her chair, still rocking. She was no longer looking at him. Her winter sky eyes were fixed on the fire, as if she was reading stories in the flames. Her humming had stopped, but the peace it had created still hung thick in the air, like the sweet smell of honey. He felt different. The deep, heavy weight of the tea-induced sleep was gone. In its place was a feeling of incredible lightness. He felt clean inside and out. It was as if all the dust and noise that had gathered in the corners of his mind had been carefully swept away. His body felt loose and limp, like a puppet whose strings had been gently cut. There was no urge to move, no desire to be anywhere else. This was exactly where he was meant to be. He watched the firelight play on the shelves of herbs and stones. He saw the bundles of drying flowers turning slowly in the warm air currents near the ceiling. He listened to the soft, sleeping sounds of the hut around him, the faint groan of a settling timber, the whisper of the wind outside, the deep, slow breath of the ancient woman in the chair. He felt a profound gratitude, a warm bubble that grew in his chest. He was grateful for the warmth, for the safety, for the silence. But most of all, he was grateful for the feeling of being completely and totally taken care of. In this place, he had no responsibilities. He didn't have to be strong or smart or productive. He could just be. He was like a child, and this strange, magical hut was his guardian. He thought about the path that had led him here. It felt like a lifetime ago that he was lying in his bed, listening to the rain on his window. That person, with his cluttered mind and tired body, felt like a distant memory. The forest, with its tests and its wonders, had washed that person away. The wolf, the glowing mushrooms, the dancing hut, they weren't just strange dreams. They were a ceremony, a ritual of letting go. And Baba Yaga was not a witch. She was a guide, a keeper of a sacred, quiet space where weary souls could come to remember what it felt like to be still. As he lay there, wrapped in warmth, a new sound began to weave itself into the quiet of the hut. It was the sound of the rain outside, but it had changed. It was lighter, softer. The steady downpour had softened into a gentle sprinkle. He could hear individual drops landing on the leaves outside the window, each one a clear, musical note. Plink, plink, plop. It was a sound of cleansing, a sound of renewal. The forest was drinking, washing itself, getting ready for a new day, and he, lying safe and dry inside, was a part of that renewal. He took a deep, slow breath and let it out in a long, contented sigh. The sound was so peaceful, so full of pure relief that it seemed to be the most important thing he had done all day. Baba Yaga's head turned slowly at the sound. Her pale eyes found his in the dim light. There was no need for words. Her gaze simply acknowledged his presence, his peace. It said, "I know, I understand." He gave her a small, slow smile. It was a sleepy smile, a grateful smile. It was all the communication that was needed. He closed his eyes again, not to fall back into the deep, dreamless sleep from before, but to simply rest here, in this perfect, in-between place. He was aware of the comforting world around him, but he was also floating in a sea of calm. The gentle rocking of the hut, the soft sounds of the ending rain, and the protective presence of the ancient keeper wove together into a final, beautiful lullaby. He was on the threshold. The magical journey was complete. The deep healing sleep had done its work, and now, cradled in the aftermath, he was simply home, ready, whenever the time was right, to gently find his way back to his own world, carrying this perfect peace with him like a secret treasure. Time in the hut had lost all meaning. It could have been minutes or hours that Alex lay on the soft rug, wrapped in the blanket of perfect peace. The fire in the great stove began to burn lower, its fierce orange glow softening to a deep pulsing red. The shadows in the room grew longer and softer, blending together until the whole hut was painted in shades of warm darkness. He was drifting in that lovely space between sleeping and waking, where every breath feels slow and deliberate, and every heartbeat is a gentle drum, marking the passage of a quiet moment. The gentle, rhythmic creak of Baba Yaga's rocking chair was the only clock he needed. Then a change began to happen. It was so subtle he felt it before he heard it. The deep, heavy silence of the hut was slowly being filled by a sound from outside. It was the sound of the forest waking up. The steady rhythm of the rain had completely stopped. In its place was the gentle, happy sound of dripping water. Plink, plop, patter. It was the sound of the trees shaking the last drops of rain from their leaves. 1,000 tiny waterfalls all playing a random, peaceful melody. Through the small, thick window, a new kind of light began to filter into the room. It wasn't the silver-gray light of the rainy twilight or the warm orange glow of the fire. This was a cool, clean blue light. The light that comes just before the dawn, when the night is giving its last sigh and the day is still only a promise. A bird somewhere very close to the hut let out a single, clear chirp. It was a small, brave sound testing the silence. Then another bird further away answered it. The forest was beginning to sing its morning song. Alex slowly pushed himself up onto his elbows. The woolen blanket slid down to his waist. He felt wonderfully rested. The deep, bone-tired feeling was gone, replaced by a soft, gentle alertness. He felt like he had slept for 100 years, but in the best way possible. He stretched his arms over his head, his muscles feeling long and loose without a single ache or pain. He looked over at Baba Yaga. She was still rocking, but her eyes were now closed. Her hands rested in her lap and her chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. She looked like a part of the hut itself, an ancient and peaceful statue. She had watched over him all through the night, and now, her work done, she was taking her own rest. He didn't want to wake her. He felt a deep respect for this ancient keeper of dreams. So he sat up all the way, pulling the warm blanket around his shoulders, and just listened to the world coming alive. He could hear the gentle rustle of the leaves as a soft breeze moved through the clearing. He could hear the chatter of a squirrel somewhere up in the trees scolding the morning. The sound of the dripping water was like a gentle, fading music. The blue light outside the window grew just a little brighter. He could now make out the shapes inside the hut more clearly. The pots of herbs, the bundles of feathers, the heavy stone mortar and pestle. Everything looked familiar and safe. This strange place felt more like a home than any house he had ever known. He thought about his own room, his own bed. It felt very far away, like a story he had read a long time ago. But the thought of it didn't bring back any of the old anxiety. The peace he had found here was a solid thing inside his chest, a warm stone he could carry with him. He knew that no matter where he went, he could close his eyes and remember this feeling. The smell of pine and herbs, the warmth of the stove, the sound of the rocking chair, and the deep, knowing silence of the ancient woman who had offered him rest without asking for anything in return. The birdsong outside grew louder, more confident. A chorus of chirps and tweets and warbles rose up, a joyful noise celebrating the end of the rain and the beginning of a new day. It was a sound of goodbye, a gentle, beautiful signal that his time in this magical shelter was coming to an end. The night of healing was over. The day was waiting. He looked once more at the sleeping form of Baba Yaga. He sent a silent thank you to her, from the very center of his heart. He hoped she could feel it in her dreams. Then he slowly, quietly got to his feet. The packed earth floor was cool under his bare feet. He folded the woolen blanket neatly and placed it on the rug where he had slept. He took one last, deep breath, filling his lungs with the peaceful, smoky herbal air, trying to memorize the scent. He was ready. It was time to go back. But he knew, with a certainty that felt as solid as the earth beneath him, that he was not going back as the same person who had arrived. He was carrying a piece of the forest's magic inside him now, a deep and lasting peace. The hut was quiet, save for the soft, sleeping breaths of Baba Yaga and the cheerful birdsong filtering through the walls. Alex stood for a long moment, just looking at the ancient woman, memorizing the scene of peace. He knew he would not say goodbye out loud. Some moments are too sacred for words, so he simply bowed his head, a small and silent gesture of thanks for the shelter, the tea, the humming, and the deep healing rest. He turned and walked softly to the heavy wooden door. He half expected it to be locked, a final test or trick, but when his hand touched the rough wood, it swung inward silently, just as it had when he arrived. The world outside was washed clean. The air was cool and fresh, smelling of wet earth, crushed pine needles, and the sweet green scent of new morning. A low, soft mist clung to the bases of the trees, and every leaf and blade of grass glittered with 1,000 tiny raindrops, each one holding the pale, early morning light. The sky overhead was a soft, gentle gray, but to the east, behind the trees, it was brushed with the faintest hint of gold and rose. Dawn was not far away. He stepped onto the porch. The 2 giant chicken legs were curled up tightly beneath the hut, looking like strange, sleeping dinosaurs. They were perfectly still. The fence of bones looked less intimidating in the soft light, more like a collection of ancient, sun-bleached driftwood. He walked down the 3 steps, his bare feet sinking into the cool, wet grass. He followed the path he had come on, the one that led back through the birch trees. With every step away from the hut, he expected the magic to fade, for the fear and noise of his old life to come rushing back in. But it didn't. The peace stayed. It was inside him now. A quiet, steady warmth in the center of his chest, like a small glowing ember from Baba Yaga's fire. He carried it with him. He walked back through the birch grove, their white bark seeming to glow in the dim light. He crossed the small mossy bridge over the chattering stream. He didn't see the wolf, but he had a feeling it was nearby, watching, ensuring he found his way back. He sent a thought of gratitude into the trees for the silent guardian as well. He walked through the forest of giant pines. The path was easier to see now in the growing light. The glowing mushrooms had faded, their magic put to bed with the night, but he could still see their pale, ordinary forms clustered on logs and stones. They were a beautiful memory. He noticed things he had been too tired to see on the way in. The intricate pattern of a spider's web jeweled with dew, the bright sudden flash of a bluebird's wing. The world was waking up and he felt a part of it, connected and calm. He wasn't sure when the change happened, but he began to notice the feeling of the ground under his feet changing. The soft, springy pine needles began to feel smoother, flatter. The scent of the deep forest began to mix with a more familiar smell, the scent of his own laundry detergent, the faint smell of the city on the rain-washed air. The trees began to thin out, their dark shapes becoming less solid, more like shadows. The light around him shifted from the cool blue of the forest dawn to the soft, gray light that had been outside his window. He took one more step, and then he was there. He was standing on the soft, worn carpet of his own bedroom. He was back. He could see the shape of his dresser, the familiar crack in the ceiling, the soft glow of his alarm clock. The sound of the birdsong faded, replaced by the distant, muffled hum of a city beginning to stir. He stood for a moment, letting the reality of his room settle around him. It was the same, but he was different. The heavy, anxious weight was gone. His mind was quiet, a still and peaceful lake. He walked to the window and looked out. The world was wet and shining from the night's rain. A few last drops fell from the eaves. The sky was beginning to brighten, promising a clean, new day. He crawled back into his bed. The sheets were cool and familiar. He pulled the soft blanket up to his chin, the same blanket he had been under when this whole journey began. He closed his eyes and he smiled. He could still feel it. The cool moss under his feet, the warm weight of the wool blanket in the hut, the deep, resonant hum of Baba Yaga's lullaby. It wasn't a dream he was forgetting. It was a memory he was keeping, a real place he had visited, a sanctuary he could return to in his mind whenever the world became too loud. He took a deep, slow breath and let it out in a long, contented sigh. His body felt heavy in the best way, perfectly relaxed and ready for true, natural sleep. The journey was over. The mystery was solved. The deepest sleep had found him, and it had given him back to himself renewed. As he drifted off, the line between the rain on his window and the rain on the forest leaves blurred one last time. He was here in his bed, and he was also there in the heart of the peaceful, mystical woods forever. And this time his sleep was deep, dreamless, and perfectly, completely his own.